If you've ever experienced camera confusion with all the different settings that are on that big fat dial on the top of your camera, you know, the one that goes P, TV, M, AV, well, this is the episode for you to help you just kind of come to terms with which mode you should be shooting in, which I recommend, and depending maybe on what stage you're at in your photography journey, which could be best for you. So we're going to be going over auto mode, manual, aperture priority, shutter priority, and program mode, at least giving you a bit of a bird's eye view of each of them. Let's get into it.
Mamastalgia.
Hello and welcome to the Art of Childhood podcast. If you're a sentimental mum trying to give your kids a joy-filled childhood, then you've found yourself in the right place. This is a space for memory collectors, photography hobbyists, and pros alike, and mums just trying to do their best. Here we will be talking about all things motherhood, as well as learning to create artful photos of our kids with our big girl cameras. So go ahead, get cozy, and let's dive in. I will never forget getting my first kind of professional grade camera. I got a Canon 5D Mark III secondhand off an old friend, and I was so excited to give it a go. I would always just shoot in auto mode, which is the one with the big A, and I wasn't always liking the results. Now, my husband didn't know a lot about cameras at the time. He knows a little bit more from what I've kind of drip fed him. But he said, well, you know, Courtney, you're not a real photographer unless you know how to shoot in manual. Now, I'm not throwing him under the bus here because I think it's a common misconception. Whilst I do think, spoiler, manual is the best way to shoot. Sorry, I'm just going to say that. I'm just going to say it outright. It's the best. I'll tell you why soon. There are definitely other options, and I know a lot of professional photographers who actually choose different modes on the camera to take their photos on for their own reasons. I'm excited to dive a little bit more into this. So just a little overview of these different modes. These modes essentially allow you the control to manipulate different parts of the image capturing process. I won't go too much into it. I go a little bit more into it in my course on just how a camera works, but there's a few key aspects which are aperture, which is basically the depth of field, so how blurry the background is. Shutter speed is how quickly your camera kind of clicks, and that's usually measured in like hundredths of a second. It's very quick. And then also ISO, which more refers to the sensitivity of your camera. Now, the camera, to get a good, well-exposed photo, is using all of these three components to work together and create the photo that you see. Again, I explain that a lot more in my online course, which I do recommend if you want to get a little bit more into manual mode. So to start with and kind of benchmark this, I want to talk about auto mode. Now, if you're like literally just picking up your camera for the very first time, it can be good to start in auto mode. The only problem is if you kind of stay in auto mode, you tend to get frustrated because in auto mode, the camera makes all of the decisions for you. It chooses the shutter speed, the aperture, the ISO, and even the white balance. Now, the problem is that it can make mistakes. But let's talk a little bit more. So I guess it's good for absolute beginners, or a quick snapshot where you don't have time to adjust the settings and you're kind of like hoping for the best. Maybe you're in, that bit of a hurry, or maybe like you're handing the camera to your mum to like snap a quick photo of you and the kids together. The problem is that the camera itself doesn't know your creative vision for the photograph. It just takes kind of its best guess. And very often that guess is like not quite what you're hoping for. So it's not going to think about like your photography style, such as how blurry do you like the background? How exposed do you want things like a little bit darker or a little bit lighter? It's just going to take its best guess. It might also whip out a flash when you don't want it to, which, that again can alter your image quite dramatically. It also kind of prioritizes like a safe exposure over an artistic one. So if you want like really dramatic lighting with, good contrast and all of that kind of thing, it might flatten it out and it just might not have that wow factor that you have in mind. But again, if you're very, very beginner and you just want to get that camera on, it could be a good place to start. Next, we have Aperture Priority Mode. Now, that may show an A or an AV on your little button there. Aperture Priority Mode gives you some creative choice. So how it works is you get to set the aperture. Like I said, that's kind of like the blurry background. And then the camera will make adjustments for the shutter speed to correct the exposure. And also the ISO. So it will let you choose like how blurry you want the background, and then it'll kind of compensate with the shutter speed and the ISO to make sure that your photo isn't too light or too dark. It's the best option if all you really care about controlling is the depth of field. So you want like a nice sharp subject and a soft blurry background. When you think of a professional photo, you think of that like nice creamy soft background, and that's kind of like what everyone's going for. When you're wanting to use aperture, it can be handy for portrait photography, and actually I know a few professional photographers who choose Aperture Priority Mode. The reason that they do this is because they don't want to be sitting there thinking about their camera all the time. So they might be working with a family and doing family photography, and they're more interested in making sure they're able to like maintain eye contact with their clients and chat instead of like being buried in their camera and changing settings all of the time. Obviously, this gives you less creative control over your final photos. So it just kind of depends on the give and take of what you're wanting to do. Now, one big concern that I often have with Aperture Priority Mode is that the shutter speed can kind of drop off a little bit and get too slow, and you might get a blurry photograph. Side note, anyone who's wondering, why is my photo blurry? It's most likely due to your shutter speed. So the shutter speed may drop too low, and that may cause your photo to be blurry. That's especially in like darker situations, like low lighting situations, because it's trying to kind of bring up the exposure by dropping the shutter speed. But in most cameras, you actually have the option, and this is what I would recommend, to put some parameters in place on your Aperture Priority Mode. So you can actually make sure that your shutter speed doesn't drop below a certain point, and then you won't get those blurry images. I would recommend that. I do think I would prefer people starting on Aperture Priority Mode, even so more than Auto Mode, because you do get that little bit of creative control, and it kind of feels like training wheels to me, even though, again, some amazing artists I know stick on Aperture Priority Mode. It does feel like quite a safe option. What I have for you to help you with using Aperture Priority Mode, if that's what you would like, is a camera baby steps guide. I've made a little freebie so that you can get started in your photography using Aperture Priority Mode. So if you go to mamastalgia.co/camera-baby steps, one word, -guide, you'll be able to download that freebie and get started in your photography using Aperture Priority Mode. You're welcome. Okay, now we're going to talk about Shutter Priority Mode. That will come up as an S or a TV on that little dial on your camera. This is great for freezing or blurring motion. So shutter speed, like I said, will control whether your photos are blurry, otherwise whether they're nice and crisp and you're freezing that motion. In this particular mode, the camera will adjust aperture to then like balance the exposure. It's best for capturing movement, so either freezing or blurring it. It's your choice with the settings that you choose when you're shooting in Shutter Priority Mode. So if you're wanting to shoot like sports photography, for example, you might want to use a fast shutter, like 1/1000, Or if you want to, have that, like, if you've ever seen those photos where a waterfall is coming down and it's like all blurry and you just see the water and it looks really smooth and silky water, then you can use this mode and slow the shutter speed down to create motion blur. So for example, if you keep your camera very still, I'd recommend on a tripod for something like capturing a light trail or a waterfall, you'll pop your camera on a tripod, use the slow shutter speed, and then click the shutter and let that kind of run as it takes the photo, and takes a long time to take the photo, so the motion kind of gets all captured in that one frame. Have you been feeling stuck for creative inspiration when it comes to photographing your own kids? Come on and take the photo pledge, and I'll deliver monthly photo prompts and ideas right to your inbox to help motivate you to get your camera out. Visit mamastalgia.co/photo-pledge, and let's take it together. But for example, if your kid is like running towards you and you don't want a blurry photo, in shutter priority mode, you would set it to a really fast shutter speed, and then the camera will do the rest, resulting in a photo which is nice and sharp. So it may not quite get the rest of the creative choices how you want it. For example, your toddler's running towards you, but you actually want that nice blurry background. The camera may choose to keep the background nice and sharp as well, just depending on the lighting and a few other factors. So you, again, with this shutter priority mode, just like aperture priority mode, you don't get the full creative control. We then have program mode. That's the little P on top of your camera. It's a bit of a step above auto. So how it works is the camera will pick the shutter speed and the aperture, but you can make adjustments to ISO, white balance, and I guess the exposure compensation. It's good for quick shots, again, where you want some control, but you don't have time to adjust everything. So you'll use the exposure compensation button to adjust the brightness. That's the little plus minus button on your camera. So think of it as like auto mode with benefits. You still get to have some creative input into the photo. Now we have my personal favorite, which is manual mode. That is the big fat M on top of your dial, and it is full control of the different settings on your camera. You're controlling the aperture, the shutter speed, and the ISO. So the camera won't actually make any automatic adjustments for you, meaning that you have total creative freedom over the image that you want to create. For me, I love doing this because I'm a bit of a control freak with my camera and I want it to do what I want it to do. For me, that's kind of the point of being an artist, is to be able to make those decisions and use my camera to bring it to life instead of just kind of relying on the camera to do the work for me. So it's really handy, especially if you're shooting in like low light photography, for example. You'll need to adjust your settings manually to get that proper exposure. Kind of the camera will usually get a bit confused in the automated modes with low light photography and just may not, make the photo look very good. So the good thing is you get all the same benefits as you did in the other modes. For example, in the shutter priority mode, you can control the shutter speed and make sure that you can either blur the image or freeze it so it's not blurry. In manual mode, you can control that shutter speed too. Same as aperture priority mode, where you're wanting to control, the depth of field and that creativity. Well, you can do that as well in manual mode without having to flip back between aperture priority mode, where you want a deep depth of field, but then you also want it to freeze the action. It's just all in one. The hard thing about manual mode is you do have to learn to balance the shutter speed, the ISO, and the aperture. It's a little bit like a triangle where you need to have kind of the correct settings on each of them to get your exposure right and everything that you're wanting out of the photograph. So it is a little bit tricky to understand and to put that all together. Mind you, a podcast is not the best way for me to teach you how to do that. And that's why I teach manual mode in the Don't Say Cheese beginner photography course for mamas. You can obviously find the link for that in the show notes if you're interested in just kind of going full hog and learning manual mode straight out. I do think that's handy because you're not kind of mucking around and getting stuck and being like, oh, I'm in aperture priority mode, but why is this photo now blurring and I don't know what's going on. If you're just able to control your camera to get the photos that you want, that is kind of like ultimate. But, there is obviously a choice. You could take a more stepped learning approach where you kind of go through each of these different settings like aperture priority mode or shutter priority mode to determine, how to use each of the settings and work up from there and then eventually get to manual mode, as opposed to just like shortcutting it and going straight to manual mode. Completely up to you how you want to take your learning and how you want to capture your memories. The thing about learning manual mode is it's one of those things you have to kind of really practice a lot, and then one day it just clicks and makes sense. It's like it goes from not making sense at all to making complete sense. The more that you practice, you get that little moment and you're like, oh, I finally understand. And then again, the more practice, the quicker you are with changing your settings. And it's just a good time. But yeah, I'd love actually to know what mode all of you guys shoot on. That would be really interesting to hear. But for now, I think maybe if you've never used any of these modes, I recommend you go away and you download that camera baby steps guide. So again, that's mamastalgia.co/camera-baby steps-guide. That's free for you and you can start to at least use your camera. Maybe give it a go shooting in shutter priority if you want to try some action shots, and even just like step into manual mode in a low stakes setting. So for example, if it's your kid's first birthday and you want to capture that like blowing out the candles moment, I wouldn't go straight for manual mode if you don't know how to use it. Just stick with a safer shot like maybe aperture priority mode and then start to learn manual mode and go that way. But don't be afraid of making mistakes. It's all part of learning. And honestly, when it comes to photography, if you don't make a mistake, you actually don't really learn anything. It's the biggest part of photography is like learning through your mistakes. And you really have to have that whole mindset when you are photographing, and especially photographing your kids.
It's time for little reflections.
So I have Duke here for our little reflections, and I'm going to ask him a few questions about today's episode. Do you want to tell us what do you like about cameras?
Yes, my camera is charged.
You like to charge your camera?
Yes.
And when you're taking a photo, Duke, on your blue camera, what mode do you use?
I don't know.
You don't know. And what do you like to take photos of?
I don't know too. Do you like taking photos of squirrels or bunnies? I don't know. Dicky, yet say he likes bunnies.
All right. So what do we do, Daisy, when we're having a hard time taking some photos?
We have to just wait until till it loads.
Wait until the camera loads?
Yes.
And what do we do if we're in a mode that's making it hard?
We just turn it onto the mode that's easy for us.
Oh, that's a good idea. And how do you get better at taking photos?
We practice until we get better. That's all for now.
I hope you enjoyed this more photography-heavy episode. I know I'll be mixing it up, so some will be like quite focused episodes like this where I'll be giving you like really, really practical tips to photograph your kids. Other of my episodes will be more about motherhood, easy listening, all that kind of thing. I'd say with this episode, you may even want to listen to it a few times to let everything really soak in and come back and listen to it again when you're with your camera and you can just kind of try out some of those different modes. So my creative challenge for you this week is just that. Make sure you go and download the Camera Baby Steps guide to start learning how to shoot in Aperture Priority mode. If you feel like a little bit inquisitive, you can try the other modes, maybe listen back to the podcast and go through the modes as I talk about them. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Art of Childhood podcast. All the handy links mentioned in this episode are in the show notes. I would love it if you would leave an honest review on your chosen podcasting platform. And as my son says when I'm getting into a particularly delicious snack, sharing is caring. So make sure you send this episode to a friend who may enjoy it. Go on and make some beautiful memories with your family today, and I'll catch you next time.